In this video, I want to talk with you about one of maybe the hardest things to write in any paper, and that's the conclusion. Believe me, I understand. I've been there. Conclusions are hard sometimes. But I want to give you a few tips and a few pieces of information about what you should and shouldn't include, and then give you some examples that will hopefully help for this Julius Caesar argument. There are some do's and don'ts with conclusions, and this is just kind of your bare bones basic list. In a conclusion, you do need to restate some things. You need to return to your introduction, return to your general topic and thesis, and kind of rehash what you've talked about. You're concluding, you're bringing it all back together. Okay, now restating is not the same thing as rewriting word for word. I know that sounds silly, but I've actually had people literally have the same introduction and conclusion. It's not word for word. Put it in your own words again. Look at that introduction and word it a little bit differently. Make it new and fresh. Another don't for conclusions is to start with the phrase "in conclusion." Now, I know what you're thinking. It is a conclusion, so why can't I say conclusion? And a lot of times when you are younger, in earlier grades, if you've had any instruction in writing, a lot of times that is what you're told to use for conclusions. But the thing about it is as we get older and as we learn more about writing, and we become more sophisticated writers, we're kind of supposed to put away those old phrases, those easier phrases that we work with. And in conclusion is kind of just a cop-out phrase. We know it's a conclusion because it's the last paragraph, so there's no reason to say in conclusion. Figure out something else to start off your conclusion with. It might be although, it might be the word then, it might just be starting off with restating your thesis, but you need to use something besides in conclusion. And then finally, one of the most important don'ts is to not introduce new information. Okay, and that is the case for any essay ever, whatever the purpose is. You should never introduce new information into the conclusion. The conclusion is just a place to review, to go over what's been said, and kind of end with strength and to just kind of close out your essay. So if you don't introduce new information in the conclusion, that means, and I said this in an earlier video, the conclusion is not the place for your counterclaim. Okay, so this is just kind of the do's and don'ts. Really, the best thing I can do for you at this point is to just give you some examples. Obviously, you can't use the examples, but hopefully they will give you some inspiration, kind of show you what conclusions can look like. Now, what I've done is I've included the introductions because you do refer back to the introduction in your thesis. Okay, so I have an example for a rhetoric argument, which is not our topic, and I have an example for a qualities of leadership argument. So I'm just going to go through these, read the introduction, read the conclusion, so you can kind of see how one transitions into the other. Okay, so if you were writing about rhetoric, the funeral speeches and whose funeral speech was the best or the most effective, here is an example of that introduction. In William Shakespeare's tragedy Julius Caesar, Caesar is assassinated by a group of conspirators. Brutus believes that the assassination is in Rome's best interest. He presents this belief to the citizens of Rome. However, Mark Antony, loyal to Caesar, undermines Brutus's claim when he gives a speech of his own. Both speakers demonstrate the use of rhetorical skills, or the ability to use words to accomplish a purpose. Although both speakers use words purposefully, only one of the speakers was able to accomplish the goal of getting the citizens of Rome on his side, and that speaker was Antony. And then the thesis, Antony gives the most effective funeral speech because he fill in the blank, whatever whatever this writer is going to say about Antony. Okay, very detailed introduction, a lot of background information. It introduces the topic, it gives the thesis. Okay, so how would you write a conclusion for this essay that has this introduction? Okay, you're going to restate the topic, restate the thesis, but not word for word. Okay, so here would be an example conclusion to go along with this introduction. Both Antony and Brutus had a purpose when speaking to the audience besides just honoring Caesar. Both speakers used elements of logos, pathos, and ethos, and both were initially effective. However, only one of the two could fully succeed in turning the commoners to their side. Antony was ultimately successful because blank, blank, and blank. Okay, so it's not a word for word rehash of the introduction. It restates some of the same information in different words. Some of the information here might appear new because it wasn't in the introduction. For example, both speakers used elements of logos, pathos, ethos, and were initially effective. That was not in the introduction, but it was probably mentioned in the body. Okay, so nothing new that had not been introduced in the rest of the essay. Okay, it is shorter, but it does return to the overall topic and return to the overall thesis. Okay, so this is one example. It is a different topic, a different argument, but it kind of gives you an example of how an introduction can become a conclusion. Now, here is an example for the qualities of leadership argument. This particular example is going to talk about Mark Antony. Of course, yours can be any, but this will just kind of give you an example of an introduction and then lead into a conclusion. So, William Shakespeare's play Julius Caesar portrays the story of Julius Caesar's assassination by a group of conspirators. In the play, many of the characters demonstrate important qualities of leadership. Although many characters possess leadership abilities, one character is clearly the best leader. Mark Antony is the best leader in Julius Caesar because he is loyal, strategic, and a talented orator. Then you have a body, you have an essay. How would we turn that into a conclusion? Okay, we are going to restate the topic, restate the thesis, not word for word, not in conclusion, no new information. Many characters in the play demonstrated the ability to lead, but one character stood above the rest. Mark Antony was clearly the most skilled leader in Julius Caesar. He was loyal to Caesar, he was strategic in his planning of important political moves, and his skill in public speaking led to him getting the common people on his side. Because of these qualities of leadership, Antony was able to overcome the schemes of the conspiracy and prove himself the best leader in the play. Okay, this time I think the conclusion is actually a little bit longer, but again, it's no new information. Everything that was said here is stuff that would easily have been addressed in the rest of the paragraph. It kind of reintroduces the topic. Many characters could lead, but here's who was the best leader. It restates the thesis in different words. It's a little bit more descriptive this time, and then you kind of have a sentence that kind of brings it all back to the thesis but closes it out strong. Okay, because of these qualities, he overcame all of this stuff and was able to prove himself the best leader. And this other conclusion kind of did the same thing. Ultimately successful because, and then you could put your thesis in your own words, restate it a little bit in a different way. Okay, so that's kind of your goal of the conclusion. Restate the general topic, restate your thesis, end strong, end with a sentence that kind of sums it all up, without getting too close to what you did in the introduction. It needs to be new and it needs to be fresh.